I'm so excited to start this particular study group because Vijay and I have been always discussing like we should do something on a deep Vedantic study. Selfish motive is our own study. Because when you do such a study, like it will force us to learn properly in a systematic way, practice all the steps you do in a time-bound manner, because otherwise you always procrastinate. So that's the greatest advantage of a class. More than everybody benefits, and those who moderate, more benefits. It will be beneficial to them. Second thing is one disclaimer. I don't think I'm a qualified person to sit here and talk about Vedanta. Gita is relatively okay, but Vedanta is deep, but I will try my best. And this is not a student-teacher relationship. Each one of you can bring your own idea. It's develop a Vedanta community. That is what the goal is like. Eventually, how to study Vedanta, how to make sure that we are really understanding the Vedanta more than a theory. How do we experience that some of the truths mentioned in Vedanta? So that's the goal. So with that, we can get started. So today, we will discuss a little bit of roadmap. What exactly is this Vedanta? Because one thing I realized when we did that first session on Upanishad is, even though everybody knows, everybody heard of Vedanta, what is this Vedanta? That is the topic we are going to see today. So today, at least when you go out of this place, you should have a clear understanding of what is Vedanta. There are a lot of misconceptions about Vedanta. That needs to be clarified and cleared. That is the goal. So we'll start. What is your understanding about Vedanta right now? No, I think you all mentioned different vertical slices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all those things together in such a way that the holistic picture is clear. Each one of you had one point. So let's see why we are here, right? Before you start anything, we should know that all of us be on the same page. What is the objective? Vedanta, all of us have some passion, otherwise you won't be sitting here. Some interest in learning Vedanta. So first, for this particular session, Introduction to Vedanta, our goal is to introduce Vedanta to a 21st century professional. Because traditional books introduce Vedanta to somebody who is spiritually oriented, somebody who is introduced this topic, somebody who is familiar with vocabulary. When I talk to a software engineer, right, a database professional, I can always say that select this from this table. If I go and tell that to an ordinary layman, right, what would he think? Where is the table? He may look for a real table. So the vocabulary, right, what exactly is the context is this being used? What is the meaning of that particular word in that context is extremely important. Without that, when we go and try to understand certain concepts of Vedanta, we will get lost. And as a result, we will conclude that this is superstition, this is myth, this has no value. But am I putting right effort and try to understand that? So what we are trying to do outside of an ashram, from a professional setup, is try to introduce this Vedanta to the 21st century people. So it is designed, means this particular program, the whole program, when I designed this program, my goal was those who are spiritual aspirant, but they couldn't get there, right? They tried so many places, tried to read a lot of books. How do we connect the dots and put them into the right path? Because we are not gurus, again, we are only showing the roadmap. So give you the roadmap, give you the necessary tools and techniques so that you can explore yourself and go through this path. Because sometimes this roadmap is very important. Even if you are the most competent person, imagine you are traveling to Canada without a GPS and without a roadmap. That's the goal. That's our goal. The third point is, there are two types of seekers. One is those who are really interested in Vedanta, but never got to expose to that. Such people, this is good. And the second category is those who have read Vedanta, read Upanishads, read Bhagavad Gita, but still, like, what is this? Because the traditional learning experience or the learning skills we got from schools and colleges may not be good enough to study this. Because this is completely different ballgame. I know, like Vijay, you can tell like how many years he had to struggle initially to get introduced to this Vedanta. And I can tell the same story. It took almost 10 years for me to make sense out of it. So whatever trouble we had gone through, probably we can skip, we can bypass that for you guys. Okay, so having said that, actually we will discuss a lot of problem places, slippery slopes. Wherever there is a problem, we will try to explain, and we will try to learn as much as possible together. So now, the purpose of this is, I just wanted to make sure that this is very clear. The first purpose is, we are trying to understand ourselves. When I say I, what exactly is that I? That is going to be one of our key focus in these sessions. Who am I? And I'm going to use all the modern methodologies, scientific techniques to do this. So who am I is the exploration here. I'm trying to understand myself. If I cannot understand myself, what else? That is the most important thing I need to know. Before I need to know my spouse, before I need to know my child, before I need to know the world, before I need to know the sun and the moon and the stars, I need to know myself. Without knowing myself, how can I be happy? How can I be efficient? How can I be transacting with the world properly? So who am I? That is going to be one of the key topics. So we are using the traditional Vedanta techniques to introduce that topic. Second thing I would say is, whatever Vedanta says, almost every other true spiritual traditions are going to say the same thing. What makes Vedanta unique is its teaching methodology. The teaching methodology of Vedanta is absolutely unique. You won't find that teaching methodology anywhere else. So we wanted to make sure that what are the tools and technique, and we wanted to introduce them as tools and techniques only. Like, for example, Dridrishya Viveka, Panchakosha. These are the tools and techniques in that process of our self-discovery. So we wanted to understand what is our goal and what exactly is the tools and techniques and the methodology we use in that self-discovery process. So this is going to be our focus. Any questions?
One question I have is Vedanta, has it traditionally been originally part of the Vedas itself?
Yeah, that's exactly I'm going to cover. This is, we need to understand this. So from tomorrow onwards or the next session onwards, whatever we are going to do, it is a process to understand ourselves. But before that, before you discuss data, you have to discuss the metadata. What is metadata? It is the data about data. Suppose you are pulling some data somewhere, right? Suppose somebody says that 57, it doesn't make any sense. But if you say that it is the age of that person, that makes sense. So that's the metadata. So today, we are going to discuss about the metadata. What exactly is this Vedanta? Where exactly it fits in? So that's it. That's going to be our goal. Okay, good question. It's exactly the way I was going. So let's start. Let's start with Veda. Vedanta constitute two words. The first word is Veda and the second word is Anta. So what is this Veda? Anybody? Should be knowing this.
Predominantly a set of rituals. Of course, the path set towards spirituality.
Veda. Okay. So any other comments? Vedas. If you ask a Christian, what is your scripture? What would be the answer?
Bible.
Forget about Christian. Anybody else in the world? What is the Christian scripture? Bible. What is the Islamic scripture? Quran. What is Buddhistic scripture? Dhammapada. But what about Hindu scripture? If you ask 5 people, you will get 5 answers. Somebody will say Ramayana, somebody will say Mahabharata, somebody in South may say some Tamil literature. All that is true, but what is the authentic scripture of Hinduism? The so-called Hinduism? Vedas. Vedas is a body of knowledge. That is how it has to be defined. Vedas came from the root Vid. Vid means to know. Veda, a noun is created out of that. It means knowledge. So Vedas means it's a body of knowledge. That's what it means. So this Veda, who created this body of knowledge? What is the purpose of this body of knowledge? Shankaracharya defines the purpose of the Veda as twofold: Abhyudaya and Nishreya. This is the definition. Praninam Sakshat Abhyudaya Nishreya Heduhu. This is what in his introduction of Bhagavad Gita, Shankaracharya tells. Abhyudaya means what? It is the socio-physical, economic welfare. That's it. So I cannot deny the world. Hinduism or the Vedic thoughts is not a world renouncing religion. When you live in the world, you have to pay the mortgage. You have to do well, right? You have to be efficient. You have to be connecting with the other members of the society. So that is called Abhyudaya. So it is, I could say that it is the psycho-socio-political, economical welfare. All round welfare around. So I need to be earning money. I need to have good relationship. I need to be performing well. I should be successful, so-called successful from a worldly sense. And the second goal is what? Nishreya, meaning what? I should be free from all the sufferings. I should be contented. I should be really happy, not temporarily happy. So what is that process which helps me to find that true happiness? So these are the two goals of the Veda. One is Abhyudaya and second one is Nishreya. This is the body of knowledge. And who gave this body of knowledge? Any body of knowledge. If it is a physics, is a body of knowledge. Who is the founder of physics? It is the collective work of all the scientists. Like that, Veda, whatever the body of knowledge or the knowledge in the Veda is the discovery of a generation of people. And such people are known as Rishi. Rishis. Rishi means what? The one who sees. Seers. If you look at an old-fashioned book, Vedantic book, you will see Rishi as seers. In fact, that's a good translation. So, Rishis are the scientists. I won't use the word scientist because it can be misleading. Rishis discovered this knowledge. They didn't invent it. I'm using the word discovery, not invention. What is the difference between invention and discovery?
Invention is something when you create something new. Discovery is something you
So Newton invented gravity or discovered gravity?
discovered.
So the gravity was there prior to Newton. And tomorrow if all of us forget, the gravity will be still there. So the law that governs the nature, the law that governs the human system, or the law that is going to uplift us, that law was there always. And we say that it came from the universal intelligence, or God, if you believe in God. And Rishis were able to discover that laws or discover that body of knowledge and document that in the Vedas. And that is what is known as Vedas. So it's the collective work of all the Rishis. And that is why Veda is known as Apaurushayam. Apaurushayam means what? It is Paurushayam means it is done, something done by a Purusha, human being. Apaurushayam means it is beyond human. Like they were able to discover it. They were just the recipient, not the inventors. Any questions? Vedas we explained. So the next question is, how many Vedas are there? 4.
3 plus 1.
Rik, Yajus, Sama, Atharva. When I say 4 Vedas, what does that mean? There is only one body of knowledge. So why 4 Vedas came?
Broken into 4 parts.
Yeah.
Different.
One sage, popular sage, known as Vyasa, he divided or compiled the Veda into 4 different books. That's all. Rik, Yajus, Sama and Atharva. So then each of these Vedas can, on a broad scale, has 2 different parts. The first part is called Karma Kanda and the second part is called Jnana Kanda. Let's try to understand what exactly it is. Karma Kanda, meaning it covers almost all the rituals, all the prayers, all the meditation. What is karma means from a Vedic sense? Anything you do, right? It could be a Vaidika karma or it could be a Laukika karma. The difference is what? Vaidika karma means it's a prayer or a ritual. Whereas Laukika karma means what? It's a normal life. Now the second point is, whatever you do as a karma, there are two types of result you get from every karma. Please follow, and any questions you just ask me, because I'm going to recap and make sure that this thought process is properly developed. Every karma has two possible results, and they call it as, one is called drishta phala and the other one is called adrishta phala. So suppose I helped somebody, right? Suppose somebody was struggling for a job. I went and helped her, trained her and helped her to find a job. What is the drishta phala, or the immediate result?
You see that person getting.
The person got a job, and he is thankful to me. He considers me as a good person. People may appreciate me. All that could be drishta phala. And there is an adrishta phala. Adrishta phala in the Vedas, in the karma, means I'm talking about the karma kanda of the Veda. The karma kanda of the Veda tells me that every karma I do will generate one drishta phala and one adrishta phala. And if my action is aligned with the rules of dharma, what is rules of dharma? The ethics of norms, right? We saw that in the class, dharma class. How you have to live your life. If, for example, and I told at that point of time, what is that? Basic dharma is common sense. I don't want to get hurt, so I don't hurt anybody. I don't want to be cheated, so I don't cheat anybody. So if my karma is in line with dharma, the adrishta phala we are going to get is called punya. If my karma is not aligned with dharma, the adrishta phala I am going to get is called papa. So the karma kanda of the Vedas tell me that you are bound by the laws of karma. What is laws of karma, right? Any situation, that every culture of the world has a word called luck. I may put my money in the stock market. I can do almost all the research. I put the money in the best stock. But what happens? The day I put the stock, some issue happens somewhere in the world. What is going to happen?
It's going to
Crash. So there is always between an X factor between me and the result always. Of course, my karma matters, but along with my karma, the point is, what was the thought? Karma, right? So, yeah. So there is an X factor between me and the result always. So how do I control this X factor? What can I do to control that X factor so that things will be in my favor? The karma kanda of the Vedas gives me so many processes, so many prayers, so many rituals. For what?
To increase the X factor.
To increase the probability of that X factor in my hand. This is the karma kandas. You can choose not to believe in it, so you can see hundreds of rituals here. For anything and everything, you can see a ritual. Too many rituals. So this is what the topic of the karma kanda. But mind you, what is the expected result by doing this karma? Something external, right? I may get money, I may get a child, I may get a promotion, or I may get a heaven. So the goal of the karma kanda is to achieve something in the external world.
I have a question.
Sure.
How practical are these? Like, we have heard of Putra Kameshti Yaga and all these things. How practical are these in today's world, where we could theoretically, if you applied it, you could basically make millions out of the stock market, or
Please don't go with that type of.
I understand.
Yeah. No, I think.
So,
Now, when you go to the Upanishads, they will completely denounce these things. So, that's
the answer I wanted.
I was developing the thoughts.
It is very easy to complicate the discussion.
Yeah,
actually.
right.
This kind of things, right?
Yeah.
This is the pure body of knowledge that we talk about.
Yeah.
That's
We should need a promotion, you start doing all this. Start doing
I would translate that into the modern terminology, right? So karma kanda, or the portion of the karma, is all the material science you are learning, right? You learn new skills. You learn, means put that into the modern practical, right? You study artificial intelligence, or you learn financial management. You take an MBA, you do this, you do that. You make contacts with so many people. All these are karmas. For what?
for your own career.
For your own benefit, for your own making money, right? In olden days, it was rituals, because at that point of time, the world view was different. Science was not this much developed. I'm being honest. So the science was not developed. For anything and everything, what they could do was only a ritual. So that's what it is. So in the modern world, you can substitute that with several actions. I can do research in the stock market. Yes, that is good, that is needed. But you need to understand what exactly it is going to bring back to me. Maximum it can bring back to me some money, some power. That is good. We are not denouncing that. We are not saying that it is bad. It is good, but we need to know what exactly it is. Now the second portion. The second portion, the goal of the karma kanda, if you take the ultimate goal of the karma kanda, is what? Going to heaven. Look, what is heaven? It is the ultimate luxurious place, isn't it? If you evaluate the degree of happiness you are getting here as 1 unit, in heaven it will be 100 unit. That's all the difference is. So the ultimate goal of the karma kanda is going to heaven. Now, second portion of the Veda, which is the Jnana Kanda. The Jnana Kanda portion of the Veda, the ultimate goal is not going to heaven. The ultimate goal of the Jnana Kanda is what? Freedom from all sufferings. Moksha means what? Freedom. That is the literal. It's the word moksha implies freedom. Freedom from what?
Freedom from all
sufferings. That's it. That's the best word. I'm going to elaborate this on the next week, what exactly it is, because that itself needs to be understood. For some people, moksha means what? Death, and then after death, no rebirth.
Right, becoming one with God.
Yeah. So that's not a positive assertion, right? That means I'm not a world-loving person. Again, I'm renouncing the world. By the way, the first Europeans or the Western people who studied the Hindu philosophy was the Germans. In the 19th century, they came to India, they started studying all these people, and they called as Indologist. That is what they called them. What was the conclusion of this Indologist on the Vedic religion? It is a world-rejecting religion. Because you say that your goal is to get freedom from rebirth. That means you don't want to live. Why? This misinterpretation of moksha. So we need to understand what is moksha. So the goal of the Jnana Kanda, that's it. So there are two portions called, one is called the Karma Kanda, the other one is called Jnana Kanda. Karma Kanda, the goal is what? Achieve all the prosperity, achieve all the worldly benefits, and ultimately go to heaven. Whereas Jnana Kanda means get freedom from all sufferings. What was Buddha's question? I see problems everywhere. I see death everywhere. I see pain everywhere. How do I get out of that pain? He had everything. So that thought is what provoked all the discussion. Then, along with that, right, moksha and the necessary knowledge for you to gain moksha is the Jnana Kanda. These are the two portions of the Veda. So now let's go. This is the high level division of the Veda. You can say that the Vedas has two major parts. One is called Karma Kanda, the other part is called Jnana Kanda. And the Karma Kanda itself is divided into three. The other day we talked about this. Mantra, Brahmana and Aranyaka. Mantra or Samhita. The chants and the mantra. Second portion is Brahmana. Brahmana means how do we do the rituals using the mantra. For example, if there is a Gayatri mantra or a particular mantra is there, how do you use that mantra in a ritual is Brahmana. And what is Aranyaka? It's the philosophical interpretation of that mantra and the ritual. All these are for the karmas, karma kanda, ritualistic part. So the Samhita, mantra or Samhita, second one is the Brahmana, and the third one is Aranyaka. That is one portion. And the last portion is Jnana Kanda, and that last portion is known as Upanishads. We saw the meaning in the other day. All of you were there, right?
Okay.
So I don't have to elaborate that. So the last portion of the Veda is known as Veda Anta, meaning what? The end portion of the Veda. And typically it is known as Upanishads. And we saw in our Upanishad class, what is the meaning of the word Upanishad? Upa means what?
To sit close by.
Yeah, that is one meaning.
Knowledge of self.
Yeah, so Upa means near, near. And Sat means what? There is one meaning, right? Wearing out or like putting an end to. So it means a definitive knowledge of something closest. What is closest of ourselves?
Self.
To us.
What is the closest thing of myself?
Ourselves.
It's me.
Right.
Right? So this is the explanation of Shankaracharya given in Kathopanishad. Shankaracharya interprets the word Upanishad as definite knowledge about yourself. That is the closest. And the second meaning is what you said. Sitting closer to a master and learning. Because this cannot be learned. This cannot be learned by yourselves. Because it is so complicated. So sitting closer to a master and learn. So let me just quickly recap. What we learned is very simple so far. We said we are going to study Vedanta. We are going to study Vedanta in a systematic way. And Vedanta means it's a portion of the Veda. And by the way, Veda means it's a body of knowledge. And this body of knowledge is for what? It is for the purpose. There is two purposes for this body of knowledge. One is economic, social welfare. The Karma Kanda is designed for that. Whether that is practical or not, it's a different question, right? Karma Kanda is designed for that. And the second portion is, it's a Nishtraya, which is your own freedom from all sufferings. So that is the two division. And then we saw like every Veda is divided into Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. Karma Kanda focuses more on the rituals, prayers and the other karmas, worldly karma. For what? For bringing glory to my life by acquiring and possessing. Better car, better home, better living style. All this is part of the karmas. See, karma has the Vaidya karma as well as the Laukika karma. You may not use the Laukika karma, but I can 100% tell you that all of us are in that Laukika karma. The Karma Kanda,
So apart from the material ones, the happiness is also part of
but
it.
what it means, Karma Kandas believe that the happiness comes by acquiring and possessing. Right? So their understanding is like a typical human being. I think that, okay, I don't have $1 million. So if I have $1 million, I'll be happy. If I have this car, I'll be happy. Unmarried may think that if I marry, I'll be happy. Right? So by
It's still having.
Raga and the Dvesha. So it means yoga and the Chema, by acquiring or rejecting. Sometimes married people will think that, okay, if I divorce, I'll be happy. So the unmarried people wanted to marry. So student wanted to become a professional. Means they think that, okay, if I start working and earning money, I'll be happy. Once I start working, I think that, okay, when I retire, I'll be happy. When I retire, I think that the health is gone. So they are searching for happiness, no doubt. They are searching for securities, no doubt. But are they going to get it or not? That's a different question.
But it's
So
still a materialistic way.
it's a material. Karma Kanda is completely materialistic. And Karma Kanda may use religious means also to get that materialistic result. If nothing else is working, you go there and do a puja. But again, the goal of that puja is what? Material benefit.
Right.
Krishna ridicules this in the Bhagavad Gita. He tells, Yamimam pushpitam vajam prapatandi vipaschitaha veda vatarada partha na anyat arthi na vijanidaha. Second chapter, verse 42. Krishna tells, this is flowery words of the unwise. Flowery words of the unwise. He tells, they quote Veda and they tell that they are spiritual people because they are doing all these rituals. Why they are doing these rituals? He tells, for what? For bhoga, power and material benefit and so-called spiritualists. So Krishna, in the second chapter of the Gita, blindly criticizes this portion. Again, we don't have to criticize it because you may criticize this now because you are thinking only about the Vaidika karma. But Laukika karmas are required in the world. Krishna tells that, yeah, you need that karma. Because even to maintain your body, you have to act. So nobody can reject the karma kanda. You may or may not follow the ritualistic part, but the Laukika karma, the action that needs to make the life move on, has to continue. But again, you have to understand that actions are finite, that actions can bring certain things up to a level, but it cannot take you beyond that level. And then if you want to get out of all these sufferings, yes, there is a method, and that is the Jnana Kanda. And the Karma Kanda is the biggest portion of the Veda. Almost 3/4 of the Veda is Karma Kanda. So what we are going to focus is only on that 1/4 small portion of the Veda, which is called Vedanta. So the Vedanta, the portion of the Veda that is called Vedanta, by the definition is called Upanishads. Now the next question is Upanishad only the Vedanta? Upanishad talks about self-knowledge because that knowledge is the most important knowledge. As I said, like, you can learn about the sun and the moon and the stars. You can learn about all the subatomic particle quarks and everything. You can understand anything and everything in the world. But if you don't understand yourself, there's a problem. So Upanishad gives that knowledge about yourself. It helps you to understand yourself. Now the question is, this portion is called Vedanta. And this Vedanta, the word can be interpreted in two ways. So the first one is the end portion of the Veda. With that definition, Upanishad is the Vedanta. But we know that Upanishad is not only the Vedanta subject. There is something more. So now the question is, what exactly is the scope creep there? Because originally it was Upanishad. But then the scope has changed further down from Upanishad. So now what happened was, Vedanta also means what? The ultimate knowledge. Veda means knowledge. Anta means final or the ultimate. The ultimate knowledge is Vedanta. You can call that way. With that definition, Upanishad fits perfectly there. With that definition, not just Upanishad fits there. Any subject matter dealing with the same subject can also be considered as Vedanta. Not Upanishad, as Vedanta. So Upanishads are of course only part of the Veda, to answer your question. But Vedanta means any subject matter, any book or any body of knowledge that refers to the teachings of the Upanishad is known as Vedanta. In fact, there are three major body of knowledge that are considered as the pivot or the major Vedantic books. What are they? It is called Prasthana Traya. Have you heard of that? Prasthana Traya. There are three major body of knowledge considered as the main books on Vedanta. Of course, the first is Upanishads. And how many Upanishads are there?
18.
200 plus they say. And out of that we have at least 100 we do have in our hand right now. And out of that 100, there are 10 Upanishads considered as the major Upanishad. why these 10 Upanishads are considered as major Upanishads? Shankaracharya, people say Shankaracharya wrote a commentary. That is not the answer. Shankaracharya wrote the commentary because for a purpose. Right? Shankaracharya wrote commentary because by studying these 10 Upanishads, you will get a complete view of yourself. That's the reason. So please don't answer that Shankaracharya could randomly pick 10 Upanishads and write commentary. Absolutely not. Shankaracharya picked up 10 Upanishads and wrote commentary. And if you read those 10 Upanishads, you will get a complete understanding of yourself. So that 10 Upanishad is one thing, the Dasha Upanishad. Second part is called Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is also considered as a Vedantic book because it is the practical Vedanta. And the third book is known as Brahma Sutra. So these are the three major books. Vedanta is not just limited to these three books, but any Vedanta, when you say that we are doing a Vedantic study group, these are the book we should be studying.
So where do Puranas fit in?
Puranas, that means of course Purana contains Vedantic teaching, but it is not exclusively a Vedantic book. For example, Bhagavata has Vedanta, Adhyatma Ramayana has Vedanta, but that's not the primary textbook of Vedanta. Definitely that is there. So I will just give a quick readout of the different types of scriptures to be followed in the Vedantic tradition. What is the other scriptures that can be considered as part of the Vedanta? I said the primary Vedantic scriptures are this Prasthana Traya. These three books. Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and the third one is Brahma Sutra. So I'm going to explain a little bit further. Means this 10 Upanishads are the primordial Upanishads. And Bhagavad Gita, it's not an exclusive Vedantic book. So there are 6 darshanas in the Indian Vedic tradition. We talked about this earlier. What is that? Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, Sankhya, Yoga, and Vedanta. Bhagavad Gita is a book that took the best from all these things. It combines Sankhya, Yoga, Vedanta, and Nyaya, at least 4, easily. But predominantly it's a Vedantic book. So when it came to Bhagavad Gita, right, the Vedanta got little bit additions, like it enriched itself by taking the best component from the other schools of thoughts also. So the Upanishad are hardcore Vedanta book, but this Upanishad, it is very hard, means it is not systematized teaching, right? Every Upanishad just goes with one area of interest. That's why later point of time Vyasa himself felt the need of systematizing the teachings of the Upanishad, and that is why he created this Brahma Sutra. That's why he created the Brahma Sutra, and the Brahma Sutras are 555 aphorisms. 555 aphorisms which systematize the teachings of the entire Upanishad. It's a brilliant work. So if you really think about the Vedanta, Upanishad are the base scripture, and from the base scripture a new scripture was added called Brahma Sutra with 555 aphorisms, which is a systematization of the entire Upanishad.
So can you say, if you read Brahma Sutra, if you have digested Brahma Sutra, you know the fundamentals from Upanishad?
Absolutely, but digesting Brahma Sutra is it's not very easy.
No, which means again, the Upanishads are much more deeper than the 555 itself, right?
Yeah. Upanishads are very deeper, but it is not systematized. It is not the holistic view. Like that's why you need to study the 10 Upanishads to get the complete picture. So Brahma Sutra, what Badarayana or the Vyasa did was he systematized, sequenced it properly. Upanishads are not sequenced. In poetry, what is a sequence? It's a mystical exposition of the truth. Whatever they felt, they just wrote it.
Is it how the rishis saw?
Yeah.
And they just documented as they
felt.
Not seeing it.
Absolutely.
So that's why it's all
over the places.
So Vyasa starts with Upanishads and the Vedas,
yeah,
and then he goes on to Gita, and then he goes on to Brahma Sutra.
Yeah. Actually,
it's like getting it better and better.
Correct. So Vyasa, what he did was initially he compiled Veda into 4.
Right.
So Veda means what? Mantras after mantras, right? Nobody knows what it is.
Right.
So what he did was he went through that and he said, okay, these are mantras. It goes here. These are brahmanas. It goes here. These are aranyakas. This goes here. And these are Vedanta. He put at the end.
He categorized it.
Yeah. So see, means you can see like mantras, brahmanas, aranyakas are related to one portion, right? Gain some material object. Then he found a whole different teaching which is completely opposite to that. He put that at the end. But he compiled it properly. Having done that, he went through that last portion of the Veda extensively. He found that, okay, this is a practical application of these Upanishads teaching. So these 3 forms the basis of the Veda. Clear? The essential scriptures of the Vedanta, right? Upanishads, Brahma Sutra, Bhagavad Gita. So if you take our Vedic system, our script means there are multiple layers of scriptures. Of course, Veda is the most authoritative scripture. It is known as Shruti. Every other scripture is known as Smriti. Smriti means what? From ourselves, means it is from remembering the Shruti, somebody interpreted it. If the Smriti contradicts Shruti, always go with Shruti. So Vedas is the number 1. Number 2 is what? Itihasas. Itihasa means that which contains itiha. It happened. It happened somewhere, but it is not just exclusively history. It has some additions. So there are 2 popular itihasas. One is Ramayana and the other one is Mahabharata. Ramayana is 24,000 verses. Mahabharata is what? 100,000 verses. And Bhagavad Gita is part of that. And both Ramayana and Mahabharata contains what? Vedantic teaching. Why? Ramayana, if you take Ramayana, I'm just reading Ramayana, I'll just share one story and we have to complete it. It'll take 10 more minutes and complete it. But Ramayana, somebody asked, right? Why do you need Ramayana? You have this brilliant Upanishads, you have Brahma Sutra, you have Bhagavad Gita, you have all these books. Why do you need to create a story of Rama? So the answer of the rishis was wonderful. They say, why do you study Veda? Upanishads. Freedom from sufferings. What is the biggest fear? Fear. It makes you free from all the fear. Freedom from suffering means one of the suffering is fear. It will make you free from all the sufferings and it will make you free from all the fear. So the Vedas are used to remove fears from you. But the Veda is afraid of something. The Veda, you use Veda for removing your fear. But the Veda is afraid of something. What? Misinterpretation. People can misinterpret Vedas. So it needs to have some hands and legs. Somebody who has to leave the value. And that is why the Puranas and the Itihasas was created. So there are, the second category of literature is known as Itihasa. It had history, but it has some additions. The idea is to illustrate one principle, and that principle is Dharmam Chara. Live Dharma. I'm going to elaborate that later, but let's keep it there. The third category of scriptures for the Vedic tradition is called Puranas. Purana means it may not be history. There are illustrations for conveying certain truths. There are 18 Puranas and 18 Upapuranas, 36 Puranas. And some of these Puranas you may find contradictory. In Shiva Purana, Shiva is the supreme. In Vishnu Purana, Vishnu is the supreme. In Shaktaya Purana, Devi is the supreme. And if you go to the Subramanya, Subramanya is the supreme. So it's fine. It is giving you the choices to select in which form you want to invoke that higher. It doesn't matter. So 18 Puranas and 18 Upapuranas. And each of these Puranas contains Vedantic teaching, but not exclusively Vedanta. So 3 categories. The fourth category of the literature is known as Sutra. Sutra means aphorisms. Aphorisms in the form of an equation, in the form of a code, it is written. That is Sutra. 3 sutras are very popular. One is Brahma Sutra, we just talked. Second one is Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. And the third is Bhakti Sutra of Narada. Last one, last category of scripture is known as Prakarana Grantha. So that is pure Vedanta. So Shankaracharya and masters like him, he found that an ordinary person cannot go and study this Prasthanatraya directly. If I go and study the Bhagavad Gita or Brahma Sutra or Upanishad, I get confused. So how do I introduce this master Prasthanatraya to a common man? So he wrote, means lot of masters wrote lot of introductory books which introduces the technical term to these users, and these books are known as Prakarana Grantha. And what we are doing is a Prakarana. We are not following a book, but we are trying to condense the teaching of all those Prakarana Grantha. Prakarana Grantha's examples are Atma Bodha, Tattva Bodha, Vivek Chudamani, Aparoksha Anubhuti, Drisya Viveka. So there are multiple Prakarana Granthas. So these are the 5 categories of literature, and all of them has Vedanta. But fundamental Vedanta books are these 3, Prasthanatraya, Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutra. And you need to understand each one of them. Upanishad is the base teachings of the Vedanta, and the systematization of the Upanishad in a codified form is Brahma Sutra. And finally, Bhagavad Gita is that teachings of the Upanishad in a practical form by enriching, by encompassing the other schools of thoughts within our tradition. Now, next problem. So this framework is established. The message of the Upanishad. The message of the Upanishad fundamentally focuses on 3 major points. One is myself, second one is the world I am interacting, and the third one is if there is a governing principle called God, what exactly is the relationship between these 3 entities. So the central teaching of the Upanishad is understand yourself and understand how you are relating to the world and how you are relating to the God. Now, this much is Vedanta. Now, this is the scope of the Vedanta. Scope of the Vedanta. This is what the theme of the Upanishads. All the Upanishads.
Scope of the Vedanta.
Yeah. Vedas are different, right? So yeah, we are going. Now we left Veda. I am going to recap that once again, but let's do that. So the scope of the Vedanta is Jiva, Jagat, Ishvara. Jiva means individual, Jagat means the universe, and Ishvara means the governing principle. This is the scope of the Vedanta. Now, the relationship between these 3 is clearly mentioned in the Upanishads. Now what happened was, different masters started interpreting this in different way. Okay? This is the complication. I'm just explaining the complication because when you read multiple books, Vedanta books itself, you may get different answers. This is the reason. So, that created subdivisions within Vedanta. So, on a very high level, Vedanta has 3 subdivisions called Advaita, Dvaita and Vishishta Advaita. So what happened was, the major work of Vedanta was these 3 books, Brahma Sutra, Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads. Shankaracharya started interpreting these Prasthanatraya. He used the framework of Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta means what?
There is no difference between
Me,
and God.
God, and Ishvara, Jagat.
They are the same.
They are the same entity. The example he has used is the wave, ocean and water. He said essentially the wave and ocean are nothing but water. So that's, he used that framework to explain these teachings, the Vedantic teachings. What is the Vedantic teaching? Brahma Sutra, Bhagavad Gita and all the Upanishads. So he wrote commentary for all these things in this point of view. Now, after some time, Another teacher came. His name was Ramanuja. Ramanuja said, no, it cannot be interpreted in that way. He introduced a new Vedantic thought called Vishishta Advaita. It is Advaita, but a qualified Advaita. He said, I am not the whole, but Jiva is not Ishvara. He said, I am a part of the whole. So he introduced Bhakti into the picture, because Shankara's one was, I am God. Ramanuja means, I am part of God. Now, after some time, the third teacher came. His name was Madhava. So Madhava started interpreting the same Vedanta. Same Vedanta means Upanishads, Brahma Sutra and Bhagavad Gita into using a different philosophical framework, which is called Dvaita. Dvaita means I am different from God. So you can see the same Bhagavad Gita interpreted in Advaita Vedantic tradition, Dvaita Vedantic tradition and Vishishta Advaita Vedantic tradition. That is why somebody was asking me in the Bhagavad Gita class, when I read it was Arnab, when I read the commentary of ISKCON, it is totally different from Swami Dayananda Saraswati's commentary. The answer is, Swami Dayananda Saraswati interpreted that based on Advaita philosophy, whereas ISKCON interpreted in Dvaita philosophy. That's it. So now, is that making sense, right? So this is how the difference. So if you look at the Upanishad commentary also, depending upon the commentator's philosophical inclination, you will see a different interpretation.
And also the period, the period that existed,
yes.
And what was the audience like?
Audience.
So the world was like that, right? So accordingly they interpreted that.
Now, going back, you may ask me, you didn't ask, but which one is the correct one? Correct? That's a natural next question.
All are correct.
All are correct. All are correct. Their point of view so.
So do you also think at some point in time there will be a fourth Acharya will come and interpret it?
Anyway, but because the truth can be looked at from different angles, because it is infinite, right? It's infinite truth, it can be looked at from different angles. So let me just give you this example. Let's take that same example of wave and ocean. And this particular example is told to me very personally by Swami Dayananda Saraswati. Even though he was an Advaita Vedantin, he was telling me that I asked him this very same question. Which one is correct? Knowing that he is an Advaita Vedanta teacher. His answer was very satisfactory. He said, everything is a point of view. Right? And he said, every point of view will be clear when the view is complete. So let's take this example of this wave and ocean. I can very well say that with respect to a wave, ocean is the god. Correct?
Right.
The wave is created by whom? Ocean. And where the wave exists? And finally, where the wave goes back? The whole ISKCON or the dualistic philosophy is this. I am created by God. I am being sustained by the God. And finally, when I pass away, where am I going? Which is correct. Now, change the point of view. I can also look at the wave as a part of the ocean. Isn't it?
Yeah.
A wave is a part of the ocean. When I change that point of view, that interpretation becomes from Dvaita to Vishishta. I am part of the whole. Now, change the point of view a little bit. What is the essence of the wave?
Water.
Top of the wave is water. Middle of the wave is water. The wave is nothing but water. What exactly is the ocean?
Water.
Water. So, essence wise,
We are all-
reality wise, the essence of wave is nothing but the essence of the ocean. From that perspective, I can say that my essence as a limited individual is the essence of the universal reality. Tat Tvam Asi. So that is also true. So these are three different point of views. So different masters started interpreting this, but Essentially, these are the same. But a point of view could be confusing when the view is not clear. So when you are not, you don't have that clarity, what is Advaita? If you think that they are contradictory, you will not understand neither Advaita nor Vishishtadvaita. So this is Vedanta, and this is what we need to study. So when we say that we need to study Vedanta, so I think when you ask me like about Vivek Chudamani, I looked at Vivek Chudamani and I found that how many verses are there? 700 verses. So, but why are we studying this? We are studying not to complete one book. We are studying to understand the body of knowledge mentioned there. So I thought, why don't I take 18, means I thought initially 16, but it will take 18 different topics and cover the basics of the Vedanta. And then what we can do is, if all of you are interested, we can study Upanishads together, right? And if time permits, we can go to Brahma Sutra. We can go in detail, right? We can go to Upanishad verses and we try to understand. We will discuss that verse in such a way that it hits us. That's the goal. It's not to that in 10 sessions we need to complete it. So that's why means that's how we will study. And my thought was this year we will cover this 18 introductory lessons and we will study Isha Upanishad, which is 18 mantras, which is very simple. Not simple, but relatively simple. Yeah, relatively simple. But I think if you just systematically study, it will not be a problem. And please continue your study, and I can guarantee you that this would be the most rewarding study in your life.